"She's only 16. Dorothy Williams's desperate cry stopped Elvis mid-song as she revealed the photograph that would change everything. Her daughter Susan had been missing for 3 days, and the mother was convinced that Elvis's music had somehow stolen her child's mind. But what Dorothy didn't know was that Elvis had been dealing with obsessed fans for years, and he had developed a secret system for helping families in crisis. What happened next would reunite a mother and daughter and teach 8,000 people the true meaning of responsibility. But to understand why this confrontation would expose one of entertainment's best-kept secrets, you need to know about a mother who had watched her daughter slip away one Elvis record at a time. Because this story begins 3 days earlier, when Dorothy Williams found a suicide note that would drive her to do something she never thought possible. It was September 23, 1976. At the Riverside Arena in Memphis. Elvis was performing a special fan appreciation concert. Dorothy Williams, a 52-year-old nurse from Jackson, Tennessee, had driven 4 hours to attend, not as a fan, but as a desperate mother whose world was falling apart. Susan Williams had been missing for 3 days. The 16-year-old honor student had vanished after a family argument about what Dorothy called her unhealthy obsession with Elvis Presley. Susan played Elvis records 16 hours a day, covered her bedroom walls with his photos, and spoke about him as if he were a personal friend rather than a distant celebrity. The breaking point had come Tuesday morning, when Dorothy suggested Susan take a break from Elvis music to focus on her college applications. Susan's response had been volcanic. "You don't understand real love," she had screamed. "Elvis understands me better than my own family." That night, Susan disappeared, leaving behind only a note that made Dorothy's blood run cold. "Dear Mom," the note read, "I would rather die than live in a world that doesn't understand true love. I'm going to find Elvis and tell him how I feel. If I can't live in his world, I don't want to live at all. Don't try to find me, Susan." Dorothy had called the police immediately, but they'd been dismissive. "Teenage runaway," they'd said. "She'll come home when she gets hungry." But Dorothy knew her daughter. Susan wasn't rebellious or impulsive. She was intelligent, serious, and when she made up her mind about something, she followed through completely. For 3 days, Dorothy had she'd called every hotel in Memphis, visited every place Susan had ever mentioned wanting to see, contacted every friend and relative. Nothing. It was as if her daughter had simply vanished into thin air. Then Dorothy heard about the fan appreciation concert. Something clicked in her desperate mind. If Susan was truly obsessed with finding Elvis, she would find a way to get to this concert. Dorothy bought a ticket, not to enjoy the show, but to scan the crowd for her missing daughter. Elvis was in the middle of his second set, having just finished Burning Love to thunderous applause. The crowd was electric, singing along to every word, lost in the magic that only Elvis could create. But Dorothy wasn't watching Elvis. She was studying every face in the arena, searching for the one face that mattered more than anything else in the world. "This next song," Elvis said into his microphone, "goes out to all the young people who find hope in music." He began the opening notes of Love Me Tender, and the arena settled into the gentle sway that always accompanied this song. But Dorothy's desperation had reached its breaking point. Standing up in her fourth-row seat, Dorothy pulled the crumpled photograph of Susan from her purse. The picture showed her daughter's bright smile, the same smile that had been missing from their home for months as Susan withdrew deeper into her Elvis fantasy world. "She's only 16. Dorothy's voice cut through the music like a scream in a library. The unexpected interruption was so jarring that Elvis stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused, gradually stopped playing. 8,000 people turned to look at the middle-aged woman holding up a photograph, her face twisted with desperate anguish. Elvis stepped forward, squinting into the audience lights to see what was happening. "Ma'am," he said gently, "is everything all right?" His voice carried clearly through the arena's sound system, and Dorothy realized that thousands of strangers were now watching her most vulnerable moment. "You stole my daughter," Dorothy called out, her voice breaking. "She's been missing for 3 days because she thinks you're more important than her family." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and the arena fell into an uncomfortable silence. Elvis set down his guitar and walked to the edge of the stage. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked quietly, but his voice was amplified enough for everyone to hear. The question was so unexpected, so personal that it caught Dorothy off guard. "Susan Williams," Dorothy replied, her voice smaller now but still audible. "She's 16 years old, and she's gone because she thinks she loves you more than life itself." Tears began streaming down Dorothy's face as the enormity of speaking these words publicly hit her. Elvis studied Dorothy's face for a long moment. Something in her expression, something in the way she held that photograph, triggered a recognition in his mind. This wasn't anger or fanaticism, this was pure maternal terror. "Mrs. Williams," Elvis said carefully, "how long has Susan been gone?" 3 days, Dorothy replied. "She left a note saying she was going to find you, and if she couldn't live in your world, she didn't want to live at all." The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly might make them less real. The arena was completely silent now. Even the photographers had stopped taking pictures, sensing they were witnessing something too sacred for flashbulbs. Elvis's expression shifted from concern to something that looked almost like recognition. "Mrs. Williams," Elvis said, his voice taking on a gravity that surprised everyone in the arena. "I know exactly where your daughter is." The statement hit the crowd like thunder. How could Elvis possibly know where a missing teenager was? Dorothy's mouth fell open in shock. "You know where Susan is?" Dorothy asked, hardly daring to believe it. How is that possible? The question every person in the arena was thinking. Elvis looked around at the thousands of faces watching this unprecedented moment. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind, making a decision that clearly wasn't easy for him. "Mrs. Williams, what I'm about to tell you, I've never said publicly before, but your daughter's safety is more important than my privacy." The arena leaned forward collectively. Elvis had everyone's complete attention, but not as an entertainer, as someone about to reveal something significant. "For the past 8 years," Elvis began, "I've been running what we call the Haven Network. It's a system for helping young people who become overly attached to public figures." Dorothy's expression shifted from desperation to confusion. "What kind of system?" she asked. The question was echoed in the minds of 8,000 people who had never heard of anything like that. "When fans become obsessed to the point where they might hurt themselves or abandon their families," Elvis explained, "we have counselors and safe houses where they can get help. Susan isn't lost, Mrs. Williams. She's at Haven House here in Memphis, and she's been receiving counseling for the past 2 days." The revelation stunned everyone. Dorothy's legs nearly gave out. The relief in her voice was palpable, and several people in the audience began cry just hearing it. "She's alive and she's safe," Elvis confirmed. "But Mrs. Williams, she doesn't want to come home. She's convinced that her family doesn't understand her, and she's afraid that returning home means giving up the one thing that makes her feel understood." Dorothy's relief was immediately tempered by a new fear. "What do you mean she doesn't want to come home?" she asked, her voice rising again. "I'm her mother. She belongs with me." Elvis stepped even closer to the edge of the stage. "Mrs. Williams, can I ask you something? And I want you to answer honestly, not just for me but for everyone here who might learn something from your answer." Dorothy nodded, though she looked wary. "When Susan talked about music, about how it made her feel, what was your response?" Elvis asked gently. The question seemed simple, but Dorothy's face showed that it had hit something deep. Dorothy was quiet for a moment, thinking. I told her it was just music," she admitted finally. "I said she was spending too much time in fantasy, and not enough time in the real world." Her voice was small, almost ashamed. And when she tried to explain why the music was important to her, Elvis continued, "What did you say then?" The arena was so quiet that Dorothy's breathing was audible. "I told her she was being silly," Dorothy said, tears starting again. "I said she needed to focus on practical things like school and work, not waste time on dreams that would never come true." The admission seemed to pain her physically. Elvis nodded slowly. "Miss Williams, I'm not judging you. You sound like a loving mother who wants the best for her daughter. But can you see how Susan might have felt that the thing most important to her was being dismissed by the person most important to her?" The insight hit Dorothy like a physical blow. I was trying to protect her," she said defensively. I didn't want her to be disappointed when she realized that celebrities don't really care about individual fans. But what if the music itself was what mattered to Susan? Elvis asked. What if it wasn't about me personally, but about how the music made her feel? What if it was her way of feeling hope, or joy, or connection to something bigger than herself? Dorothy was crying openly now. I never thought of it that way, she admitted. I just saw her withdrawing from us, from her real life. And I got scared. The honesty in her voice was affecting everyone in the arena. Fear makes us do things that push away the people we're trying to protect, Elvis said gently. Susan didn't run away from you because she loves me, Williams. She ran away because she felt that you couldn't love the part of her that music had awakened. The insight was profound, and Dorothy could see the truth in it. So what do I do? She asked. How do I get my daughter back? The question carried the weight of a mother's love and regret. You start by understanding that Susan isn't broken or sick, Elvis replied. She's a young person trying to figure out who she is, and music has become part of that identity. Instead of trying to take that away from her, you need to learn why it's important to her. Dorothy nodded, absorbing this. Can I see her? She asked. Can I talk to her? The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking. Elvis turned to someone off stage and gestured. Within moments, a woman in professional attire approached the microphone. This is Dr. Patricia Hayes, Elvis announced. She's the director of Haven House, and she's been working with Susan. Dr. Hayes stepped forward. Mrs. Williams, she said, her voice warm but professional. Susan has been asking about you constantly. She's not running away from your love. She's running toward an understanding of herself that she fears you won't accept. What does that mean? Dorothy asked. I accept everything about my daughter. Do you accept her passion for music? Dr. Hayes asked gently. Do you accept that she might want a career that seems impractical to you? Do you accept that she experiences emotions more intensely than you might be comfortable with? Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. I want to, she said finally. I want to understand. I just don't know how. The admission was raw and honest. That's exactly what Susan needs to hear, Dr. Hayes said. Not that you understand everything about her, but that you want to understand, that you're willing to learn about the parts of her that are different from you. Elvis had been listening to this exchange and now he spoke again. Mrs. Williams, would you be willing to spend some time at Haven House? Not to take Susan home immediately, but to work with counselors on understanding each other better. Dorothy looked around the arena, suddenly remembering that 8,000 people were watching this most private family crisis play out publicly. Yes, she said. Whatever it takes to get my daughter back. Then I'd like you to meet Susan tonight, Elvis said. She's here. The statement caused another gasp from the crowd. She's been watching from backstage, and she's been hoping you would come looking for her. Dorothy's face lit up with hope and terror in equal measure. She's here, right now. When Elvis nodded, Dorothy's voice became urgent. Can I see her? Please, I need to see her. Elvis gestured toward the side of the stage, and a young girl emerged from the shadows. Susan Williams was thin and pale, wearing an Elvis t-shirt and looking much younger than her 16 years. When she saw her mother in the audience, she stopped walking, her face showing a mixture of love and fear. Susan, Dorothy called out, starting to move toward the stage. But Susan held up her hand, stopping her. Mom, Susan said, her voice barely audible but carried by the microphone system. I need to say something first. Dorothy stopped, her heart visible breaking at the distance between them. I didn't run away because I don't love you, Susan continued, her voice growing stronger. I ran away because I felt like you couldn't love all of me. The part of me that feels things deeply, that finds meaning in music, that dreams about things you think are impossible. Dorothy was sobbing now. Susan, honey, I do love all of you. I just got scared that you were losing yourself in fantasies. The words came out broken but sincere. But Mom, Susan said, tears starting in her own eyes, the music isn't a fantasy. It's the thing that helps me understand my own feeling. When I listen to Elvis sing about love or loss or hope, It helps me figure out what I'm feeling inside." The arena was completely silent. 8,000 people holding their breath as they witnessed a mother and daughter trying to bridge a gap that had nearly destroyed their family. "I never understood that," Dorothy admitted. "I thought you were escaping from real life, not trying to understand it better." The admission seemed to cost her something, but it was clearly honest. Susan looked at her mother for a long moment, then walked to the edge of the stage. "Mom, can you try to understand that music isn't taking me away from you? It's helping me figure out how to be the person you raised me to be." Dorothy looked up at her daughter, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in months. "I can try," she said simply. "I want to The words were quiet, but they carried across the arena like a promise. Elvis, who had been watching this exchange with visible emotion, stepped forward. "Mrs. Williams, would you like to come up here?" he asked. "I think Susan has something else she wants to say to you." With help from security, Dorothy made her way onto the stage. Mother and daughter stood facing each other, both crying, both afraid, both hoping. The arena watched in complete silence as this private moment played out publicly. "Mom," Susan said, her voice shaking, "I'm sorry I scared you. I'm sorry I made you think I didn't love our family. I do love you, I just needed you to love this part of me too." She gestured toward herself, toward the Elvis t-shirt, toward everything that represented her passion for music. Dorothy stepped forward and pulled her daughter into a fierce hug. "I love every part of you," she whispered, but the microphones picked it up. "I love your passion, your intensity, your dreams. I was just afraid of losing you to a world I didn't understand." "You don't have to understand it all," Susan said into her mother's shoulder. "You just have to trust that it's part of who I am." The simplicity of the request made it even more powerful. Elvis, watching this reunion, felt his own eyes filling with tears. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the audience, "I think we're witnessing something more important than any concert could ever be." The crowd erupted in applause, but it was respectful, moved applause from people who recognized they had seen something sacred. As the applause died down, Elvis addressed both women. "Mrs. Williams, Susan, would you be willing to help me with something?" Both women looked at him curiously. "I'd like to finish tonight's concert with a song, and I'd like you both to help me sing it." "I can't sing," Dorothy protested immediately. "I'm not a performer." Elvis smiled, the first real smile since this confrontation had begun. "Neither was I when I started," he said. "But music isn't about being perfect. It's about expressing what's in your heart. And right now, your heart is full of love for your daughter. That's all the music anyone needs." Elvis turned to Susan. "And Susan, you know every word to every song I've ever recorded. But tonight I want you to sing, not as a fan, but as a daughter who's helping her mother understand why music matters." The three of them stood together at the microphone as Elvis began the opening chords of "Love Me Tender." But this time, the song had a different meaning. It wasn't about romantic love. It was about the tender love between a mother and daughter who were learning to accept each other completely. As they sang together, something magical happened. Dorothy's voice was untrained but genuine, Susan's was sweet and true, and Elvis provided the foundation that allowed both women to find their confidence. The arena joined in, 8,000 voices creating a moment of pure connection and understanding. When the song ended, the applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was healing. People were crying throughout the arena, moved by the reconciliation they had witnessed and the lesson they had learned about love, acceptance, and the courage to bridge differences. Elvis put his arms around both women as the applause continued. "Thank you," he said to them quietly. "You've reminded everyone here, including me, what really matters." The words were private, but the microphones carried them to the audience. As Dorothy and Susan prepared to leave the stage together, Elvis stopped them one more time. "Mrs. Williams," he said, "I want you to know that Susan never wanted to leave you. She just wanted you to see her clearly. And Susan," he turned to the teenager, "your mother never wanted to hurt you. She just wanted to protect you. Sometimes love looks different than we expect." The insight was simple but profound, and both women nodded, understanding something about their relationship that had been unclear before. As they walked off stage together, Elvis addressed the audience one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we learned that the most important music isn't what comes from instruments or voices. It's the harmony we create when we choose to understand each other instead of judging each other. The crowd was silent, absorbing the lesson. Dorothy and Susan Williams reminded us that love isn't about agreeing on everything. It's about accepting that the people we love might experience the world differently than we do. And that's not a problem to be solved. It's a gift to be celebrated. Elvis picked up his guitar and began the closing song of the evening, "Can't Help Falling in Love." But as he sang, the lyrics took on new meaning. The song wasn't just about romantic love. It was about the inevitable, irresistible love that draws families back together when they choose understanding over judgment. The concert ended with a standing ovation that lasted 20 minutes. But it wasn't just for Elvis. It was for Dorothy and Susan, for their courage to work through their differences publicly, and for the lesson they had taught everyone about the healing power of acceptance. Backstage after the concert, Elvis spent another hour with the Williams family, connecting them with counselors and resources to help them continue building their understanding of each other. He also explained more about the Haven Network, the secret system he had developed to help families in crisis. "We've helped 127 families over the past 8 years, Elvis told Dorothy. "Not because I want credit, but because fame comes with responsibility. When people look up to you, especially young people, you have an obligation to help when that attention becomes unhealthy." Dorothy was amazed by the scope of what Elvis had created. "Why don't people know about this?" she asked. "This could help so many families." "Because the moment it becomes public, it becomes a circus," Elvis explained. "Families in crisis need privacy and professional help, not media attention. The system works because it's quiet and focused on healing, not publicity." Susan, who had been listening to this conversation, looked at Elvis with new understanding. "So when I was fantasizing about you as this perfect person who understood me better than anyone else, you were actually just a person who cares about helping families stay together." Elvis smiled. "That's exactly right, Susan. I'm not the fantasy you created in your mind. I'm just someone who learned that having a platform means using it responsibly. The real magic isn't in me, it's in families like yours, who choose to do the hard work of understanding each other." The insight transformed Susan's perspective completely. Her obsession with Elvis as a romantic ideal was replaced by respect for Elvis as someone who used his influence to help others. "That's actually more impressive than any fantasy I created," she said. Over the following months, Dorothy and Susan worked with counselors from the Haven Network to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of mutual understanding rather than control and rebellion. Dorothy learned to appreciate Susan's musical passion, even helping her daughter apply to music programs at several universities. Susan, meanwhile, learned to channel her intensity into productive goals rather than escapist fantasy. She began writing songs, volunteering with local music therapy programs, and using her own experience to help other teenagers who struggled with the balance between dreams and reality. The impact of that September night at Riverside Arena extended far beyond Dorothy and Susan Williams. Word of the family reconciliation spread throughout Memphis, not through media coverage, but through the powerful network of people who had witnessed something extraordinary. The Haven Network, which Elvis had kept carefully hidden from public view, began receiving calls from families across the country. Parents who had heard whispered stories about the Williams family reached out desperately, seeking help for their own children struggling with celebrity obsession. Dr. Patricia Hayes found herself coordinating a massive expansion. After the Williams case, she later wrote, "We realized the problem was much more widespread than we understood. Celebrity obsession wasn't rare. It was an epidemic that families were facing in isolation." The expansion required Elvis to make a difficult decision, whether to formalize the Haven Network as a legitimate nonprofit organization. Until that point, the program had operated quietly, funded entirely by Elvis's personal donations. Elvis struggled with this decision for months, recalled James Burton, his longtime guitarist. He knew making the program public would help more families, but he was terrified that publicity would turn genuine healing work into a media circus. The decision was made when a crisis emerged too large for the secret network to handle. In November 1976, A 17-year-old girl in California died by suicide after becoming convinced a rock star was sending her personal messages through lyrics. Her family filed a lawsuit, and suddenly celebrity responsibility for fan behavior was being debated nationally. "I can't stay silent when I know we have answers," Elvis told Dr. Hayes. "How many families are suffering in silence right now?" Elvis announced the program during a television interview with Walter Cronkite in February 1977. Instead of discussing music, he spent the hour explaining celebrity obsession and available resources. "When you have the attention of millions, especially young people, you have a responsibility," Elvis told Cronkite. "Some fans develop unhealthy relationships with public figures, and when that happens, both the fan and their family need professional help." The interview had immediate impact. Within 24 hours, the Haven network received over 3,000 calls. Within a week, over 10,000 families were seeking help. Elvis funded Haven House facilities in 12 cities, each staffed with trained counselors, specializing in parasocial relationship. The program developed educational materials for parents and teachers, helping them recognize warning signs. Susan Williams became one of the program's most effective advocates. Her transformation and reconciliation with her mother became a template for other families. "Susan taught us that obsession isn't really about the celebrity," Dr. Hayes explained. "It's about what the celebrity represents: understanding, acceptance, escape. Once we understand what need the obsession meets, we can help find healthier ways to meet that need." The Williams family became regular speakers at Haven Network events. Dorothy's transformation from frightened mother to advocate became as inspiring as Susan's recovery. "I learned that my daughter's passion wasn't the problem," Dorothy would tell audiences. "My fear of that passion was the problem. Once I stopped trying to control what Susan loved and started understanding why she loved it, our relationship became stronger." Universities began incorporating the program's research into psychology curricula. The American Psychological Association developed new guidelines based on the network's findings. Entertainment industry organizations implemented policies promoting healthy fan relationships. By 1980, the Haven Network had helped over 25,000 families internationally. Follow-up studies showed 89% of families reported improved relationships, and 94% of individuals developed healthier coping mechanisms. Susan graduated from Belmont University with a music therapy degree and joined the Haven Network as a counselor. "I tell teenagers I work with that I understand exactly how they feel," Susan explained. "But real understanding comes from real relationships with people who actually know you." Dorothy became a specialist, working with parents struggling to understand their children's intense interest. Her approach, emphasizing curiosity over control, became a model nationwide. Elvis remained deeply involved until his death in August 9. His final public appearance was at a Haven Network fundraising event, where he spoke about using fame responsibly. "The greatest gift of my career hasn't been the music or recognition," Elvis said in his final public speech. "It's been the opportunity to help families find their way back to each other." The Haven Network continued after Elvis's death, permanently funded through the Elvis Presley Foundation. Today, it operates in multiple countries and has helped over 150,000 families. Susan Williams, now Dr. Susan Williams Chen, serves as current director. She often ends presentations with words that changed her life. "Music isn't about escaping reality. It's about understanding reality more deeply." The story reminds us that love isn't about agreement. It's about acceptance. Even the most broken relationships can be healed when people have courage to see each other clearly and choose connection over control. Have you ever had to choose between trying to change someone you love and trying to understand them? Share your story in the comments, because just like Dorothy and Susan learned that night, sometimes the most beautiful harmony comes not from singing the same notes, but from finding ways to blend our different voices into something stronger together.